2024.
And do we have someone who'd like to come up and speak on this? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Jennifer Berquist from the Lawrence Rotary Club. And I just wanted to mention a few other facts about polio. We started Polio Plus in 1985, and in 1988, the Global Polio Eradication Initiative started. In 1988, there were 125 endemic countries, and then right now we're down to 2, would be Afghanistan and Pakistan. And so one last thing is we just believe we want to keep doing this because until it's eradicated, every child is at risk. And if it's anywhere, it can be everywhere. So thank you so much for recognizing this day.
Thank you very much for being here with us. So moving to the rest of our agenda, we do have paper copies of the agenda by the door if anyone would like that. And of course, our full packet is available online. We were going to have a consent agenda. We have several items on our consent agenda. And if anyone would like to pull an item, we'll ask that shortly. We also, after that, will have general public comment. So during general public comment, each speaker will be limited to a total of 3 minutes of speaking time. However, we always accept public comment of any length in writing. Individual speakers may not donate unused time to other speakers, either for general public comment or during a particular agenda item. All comments must address topics within the jurisdiction of the County Commission. We also maintain the decorum of our meetings by prohibiting public comments that are threatening, aggressively hostile, or belligerent, fighting words, slander, or speech that invades the privacy of individuals, unreasonably loud, disruptive, or repetitive, or that interrupt or substantially interfere with the board's ability to conduct county business. We do reserve the right to mute or remove any speaker who violates these public comment rules. At that time, we'd ask for your name and address for our meeting minutes and give your comments to the commission. Please know that comments received by the commission during our meetings do not necessarily represent the views of Douglas County government, but that we value the input. We don't usually respond to general public comment on the spot, but if you leave your contact information with county staff, we'll try and get specific questions answered. After that, we move to our regular agenda. And again, for each action item, we'll hear from staff or an applicant, followed by questions from the commission, and then open that item up also for public comment that's relevant to that item. Once public comment is closed, we'll bring the item back to the commission for further discussion and a vote. And lastly, a recording of this meeting is available on the county's YouTube page and website. So commissioners, starting with you, are there any items on our consent agenda that you would like to remove for further conversation?
No.
Is there any member of the public who would like to pull a consent agenda item for further discussion? Seeing none in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone online? Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve consent agenda items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. And that moves us to general public comment. Do we have anyone in the room who would like to give general public comment today?
I want to start by making sure that everybody in the room knows that Karen was not elected to the position, so therefore she cannot be re-elected. I think she knows that. Patrick, the response that you gave to Brent Bovee was woefully lacking. And yeah, science. I just had to throw that in there because it seems like you really just threw that science in there for something. And I don't know whether it's a nod to the COVID people or a nod to Breaking Bad. I don't know, but yeah, science. Karen, why can't you be honest with the voters? It seems like your character is to cheerlead and protagonate, but you don't actually clear up any questions or level with people. You know, there's pending litigation involving you and some backroom stuff. You kind of set an example for people to look at to see what's going on up in Jackson County too. I want to appreciate you for that. There was an interesting podcast, YouTube video done yesterday called Lying Liars and the Lies They Tell. And it featured you, Karen, on the cover. And the reason it did is because they called out a number of your lying lies and the lies that you've told. I voted the other day. Wanted to go ahead and give you an update on that. Wrote Brent Bovee in for county treasurer, and I want to encourage everybody in the county to go ahead and consider writing him in just to send a message to you that we don't like your bullshit. And that when somebody comes in here and asks you legitimate questions about the finances and about the budget, blowing them off. Notice I'm a little calmer this evening than I am sometimes. You know where that's from? The realization that you'll do it to everybody, not just me. You'll do it to everybody. You'll do it to somebody like Brent. You guys will stonewall him and treat him like he doesn't understand things. The voters understand, Karen. The voters understand your character. They understand the fact that you can't be honest with them about things. And they also understand science. Right? Good eye contact tonight. Did you hear me? You're making eye contact tonight, but did you actually hear me? You feel superior? That's where some of that comes from. A superiority complex and an infallibility ego. Be careful with that. It'll get you in trouble.
Do we have anyone else who'd like to give general public comment?
Yeah, my name is Dr. Justin Spees. I got a question for you guys. I heard in your rules there about general public comment, you said that you don't allow slander to be said in here. So I just got a question for you then. Listening to Michael there, was any of that slander? If it was, then why didn't you stop him? And if it wasn't slander, then I guess it's true, right? I mean, take, for example, your campaign thing saying that to re-elect you. You were never elected. No one ever voted for you. You got appointed by the council, the Democratic committee people in the fall of 2022 after Democrat Commissioner Shannon Portillo just walked away from the job halfway, not quite halfway into her 4-year term. So you got appointed by those committee people who are a reflection of the Democrats there that appointed you and that would vote for somebody like Shannon Portillo, who has no integrity whatsoever and no commitment at all to the constituents, to the commission, to the county, to her word, anything to just walk away. And in the process of walking away, you then got appointed. So you haven't been elected, so you can't be reelected. So, and I guess that's why you didn't stop Michael there, because that's not slander. That's not a false statement about you. That is a statement of fact. And it sounds like pretty much everything else he was saying as well is a statement of fact as well, because again, according to your rules, if there's some slander being said here, then, then that has to be stopped. And so then it just makes me wonder, like, how do you even gauge that? Are you guys are the jury up there, the judge and the jury that says, oh, that's slander. That's not true. We're going to stop you. So that, again, that's kind of like an arbitrary kind of rule. It's not a clear rule on what it is, but also maybe, I don't know, maybe it is, because again, you didn't stop Michael. So it all seemed like that was true, that you really are, you really are as crooked as you are. I mean, setting all that stuff aside, I mean, I don't know how anybody would vote for you. I was in here on May 1st of this year, and I had a sign that said, women have more balls than Patrick too. And I started talking, and Karen, you said I couldn't have the sign in here. And then a little bit later, I was arrested for standing here with the sign, unlawfully arrested by you guys. And so I don't know why anybody would vote for somebody that can see them doing that to the citizens and not think, well, if she's doing it to him, I mean, it could happen to me someday as well. So I wouldn't like that. I could go in there and I could start talking, or I could have a sign that they don't like. And next thing you know, I'm in jail. I don't think I would vote for that. And if you don't think it can happen to you, I mean, look at Courtney Shipley. She did that to me at a city meeting and shut me down. It's part of the lawsuit I have with them. And she's not mayor anymore, not on the commission anymore. And she got shut down while she was talking there at the city meeting. So, I mean, yeah, it can definitely happen to you guys. So I don't know why you'd vote for her at all, or any of these assholes really, but whatever. Democrats are Democrats, so there you go.
Is there anyone else who'd like to give general public comment? Seeing none in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone online? All right, without closing general public comment, bring it back to the commission for our regular agenda. And we will start with the bylaws for the Emergency Communications Center. Sarah, are you kicking this off? or
Yeah,
we-
Commissioners, I'm kicking it off, and I've got Tony Foster here from our Emergency Communications Center if you have any questions. As earlier this year, the Commission approved a new financial governance agreement between the City of Lawrence, City of Baldwin City, the City of Eudora, and Douglas County for the joint financing governance of our Emergency Communications Center. One of the recommendations of the report that we did was to formalize what we've had in the past, which was an informal 911 advisory board. So basically, this is in essence a board that has been meeting informally, but to formalize it with some bylaws and some clear clear voting structure, and that is what we have in front of you. It has been reviewed by council at both here in the City of Lawrence. My understanding is it's on the City of Lawrence's agenda for the 5th. I think it was initially reviewed by the City of Baldwin City of Eudora last night, and I'm working on getting a date for when it's going to be viewed by Baldwin City. So there's an outside chance that the cities might have some modifications. So if that's the case, what I would do is then make those modifications and put it back on your consent agenda. But I think my hope is that this is our final version of the bylaws. And Commissioners, we just stand for any questions you might have.
Commissioners, do you have any initial questions? All right. This is a public comment item. Is there any member of the public who would like to give public comment on this? Seeing no one in the room, Sarah, do we have anyone online?
No, we do not.
Okay. That closing public comment, bring it back to the commission for any thoughts.
I don't have any third thoughts. I really appreciate the work that's been put into this, especially the thought about how decisions are made. And I know most of the time it seems like consensus, but I really liked it that it was clearly said, in case we can achieve consensus, if there's something to vote on, and thinking about the structure and how much weight each community had within that. I really appreciated that thought. Commissioners, I'm happy to make a motion unless anyone has further comments.
I would have one comment. Okay. And that is, so we have 2 votes for the county, 2 for Lawrence, 1 for Baldwin, and 1 for Eudora. And that's based on, the who's getting dispatched from those different organizations now, and then recognizing that Lecompton is not on that list specifically because it's Sheriff's Office and CFD1 that are covering that area. So there's not an additional dispatch that comes through on behalf of Lecompton. But I think it's important to keep that in mind, that that is a population center and a community that will need to be especially heard from in the process. So just that one of those county votes, it would be of high priority to me that they have some knowledge and experience of Lecompton and Lecompton's needs within that.
Yeah, and I think that would be represented by the Sheriff's Office, who is under contract to provide law enforcement services for the City of Lecompton. So, and if that situation changed, if Lecompton decided to start its own police service, then we would adjust this agreement accordingly.
And presumably those 2 members from the county are folks that we would have some say over who would serve in that role.
Well, I think that's not how it's lined out in the bylaws, that those are, I think it's outlined that one of the positions is myself or a designee, and the Sheriff's Office on the technical group. I need to pull up the group, but I don't know that I'd be coming back to the commission to make formal appointments.
And I just want to make sure that we're fully considering Lecompton and their needs within that larger county picture.
And really the reason why we did this is because these are the folks that are paying for it. Lecompton is not paying for it, nor are they paying for necessarily the service for the Sheriff's Office. So it was important to all the stakeholders that the folks that are financing it are represented at the table. However, I do think we do a pretty good job of making sure that we represent the whole county as a whole, and that the sheriff will be able to do that.
And Tony, did you want to respond to that too?
Yeah, if I might weigh in, the bylaws in this group that is the voting members is going to be a representative from each of the municipalities that pay into the financial agreement. Under that, we will have the technical advisory committee that we currently have, which has a representative from the Sheriff's Department, also from CFD1, and the city of Eudora, city of Baldwin, for both fire and EMS and for law enforcement. So that group has a weigh-in for all services that would be provided to the city of Lecompton.
Thank you. Commissioners, other thoughts, questions, motions?
Motion to establish the Emergency Communications Center, ECC Board, and approve the bylaws.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. That brings us to a planning item, and I believe we have Catherine Week here with us to walk us through that. Oh, and I have some ex parte conversations that I've had with people about this. Do you want that before we begin?
I didn't know if she wanted to pull, yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that while she's pulling up her slides.
So we have some emails in our packet that reflect what I heard from Mark Elston. I think those went to everybody, and they're also in the packet. I got a text this morning or yesterday from a Ron Arnold, another neighbor there, who also has a letter in the packet with the same general content, so nothing in particular that's new there. And then I had a text and a phone call, and then a visit from James Nichols, who is a neighbor there. Also, his letter is included in the packet. He did present at the Planning Commission with some additional maps that he showed at that time. He did bring paper copies of those maps, which I forgot to bring with me, but they are part of the public record from the Planning Commission meeting also. So that's what I have. Commissioners, do you have any others? Okay, thank you.
All right, good evening, Commissioners. Happy to be in the room with you today. I'm Catherine Week with the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Office, and I'm here to present this item that was originally heard before the Planning Commission on September 23rd. And this is for a rezoning request at 1231 North 400 Road. Okay, so this is the general area that we're talking about. It is close to the intersection of 56 Highway and 59 Highway, just a little bit north of 56, south of Lawrence proper and west of Baldwin City. This is the location, zoomed in a little bit just to kind of give you a general idea of the lay of the land or the parcel sizes in this particular area. The shaded green area, the whole rectangle, is the area of the parcel that is being requested for rezone. The shaded green area is what is being reflected as the proposed reason for why they would like the rezoning from AG1 to AG2 is to, in the future, subdivide it into two 10-acre parcels for the potential development of another rural detached dwelling on the easternmost portion. This is the general zoning in the area. The subject property outlined in teal, and now you can see the whole rectangle, which is just over 20 acres. Again, this is the AG1, which is our primary agriculture district in the county. And then they're requesting the AG2, which is transitional agriculture. The primary difference between the two is that AG1 is geared towards those larger 20+ acre parcels. And then the AG2 district is geared towards the parcels that are under the 20 acres. And the AG2 is indicated with the yellow and AG1 indicated with the blue. And this is a use pattern map, and I mentioned this in the Planning Commission. There's a couple other areas. This is a GIS map generated from 2023, 1180 up here in the north portion, and 1201 and 363 are actually also being utilized for rural detached dwellings, which is what the yellow is indicating. So those three would also be yellow in today's use classification. The green areas are what are still classified as primarily ag. Some of them may have a rural residence on them as well, but they're still large enough acres that they can be classified as ag parcels. And just the basic key points of this request before you. Again, this is kind of a unique situation or context area. This is an AG1 zoned property that is kind of situated in a AG2 developed rural detached dwelling kind of strip along N400 Road. The property owner would like to rezone this to the AG2 district to facilitate the division into two 10-acre parcels. Currently, that AG1 district does not permit division less than 20 acres. So the they would need to rezone before they would be able to potentially do a certificate of survey to have those two 10-acre parcels. The property is not located within any of the growth tiers of the Lawrence urban growth area, nor is it located within the 3-mile municipality buffer of Baldwin City. So the comprehensive plan document is the document that is the guiding document for rezoning requests or any type of development proposal in the unincorporated portion of the county. The request to divide the property into the 2-acre parcels would result in 2 parcels of a similar size to the parcels that are north and west along that N400 road. Actually, most of them are slightly smaller than the 10 acres, but this would facilitate that 10-acre split. There is currently 1 residence and 3 existing agricultural or accessory structures on the property, and that's on the west portion of the property. That would remain, or it could, someone could rehab it or do a dwelling on that side if they chose to take that down, but that would be its own parcel if this were a successful rezoning and future division into 2. And then the east portion of the property would be that 10-acre parcel that would potentially have the possibility of having another rural detached structure. This parcel is adjacent, as I mentioned, to the North 400 road, which is a local road. And it's also adjacent to East 1250, which is, I think that's Old 59 Highway. That is a principal arterial or collector road. The current parcel does take access from N400 Road, as do all of those parcels along N400 Road. And it would be anticipated that it would also, the new parcel, if it were divided later, would also take access from N400 Road. So there wouldn't be any change or increase of access points along the arterial or principal major collector road. Planning staff likes to include this slide for commissioners and for anyone in the audience or anyone who likes to or wants to speak on it. These are just the review criteria that planning staff uses to evaluate or analyze any request that comes before our office. These are outlined also in the staff report. I won't belabor them. We can go into them if you have specific questions. But basically, this analyzes or outlines what we're analyzing when we look at any rezoning request. We're looking at the character of the area. We're looking at zoning of nearby property. We're looking for the suitability for which the uses that are restricted currently and the uses that might potentially be permitted. We're looking at whether or not the property is vacant. We're looking at whether or not any removal of a restriction would detrimentally affect nearby properties. We look at the gain to the public if a denial were the outcome, as opposed to any hardship imposed on the landowner if there was a denial of the request. And again, we look at that comprehensive plan and any other adopted plans for the area. We look at the suitability of the property for agricultural uses, particularly in instances where we're talking about AG1 districts. That comprehensive plan really focuses on those agricultural uses in the unincorporated portion of the county. And that is an analysis point when we're looking at converting AG1 to some other district. So that is also outlined in the staff report, and we can talk about that if we need to tonight. We look at whether or not there's any impact on environmentally sensitive lands. There is a creek or stream corridor on this property. With this proposal, they've basically outlined that the division of that property would be just to the west of that creek or stream corridor and wouldn't impact, that would be more like a buffer between the 2 parcels. There's also state agencies that regulate any changes to stream corridors, so anything that they would be proposing, which they have not, would have to go through those approval processes for any changes to the stream corridor. And then, of course, there's a staff recommendation, which we are giving to you tonight. So we're probably going to talk a little bit about uses tonight. We've had a public comment, and I think all of the commentary or correspondence is in the packet for you tonight. But some of the uses, the unique thing about AG1 and AG2 is they basically permit the same uses by right. So both districts are identical in that regard, but they have some differences as far as what's permitted by conditional use permit. There are some, I think 7, and I have a list here if we can go into them, that would be permitted by a conditional use permit on the AG2 parcel, and there's 2 that could be potentially permitted on AG1, which exists there currently. And we can talk about those differences. But again, the primary difference for these two zoning districts is size of the parcel. That is primary district difference. And just go ahead and skip to this. Communications are all in the packet. Staff is making a recommendation of approval, and we did that at the Planning Commission as well. The Planning Commission is also forwarding a recommendation of approval. They voted 7-3 to forward that. One item of note for this particular item, there is the opportunity for a protest petition in the Douglas County regulations. The planning staff did receive a protest petition for this particular item. What that means for anything that you all are going to weigh in on is that requires a 3/4 vote. If the protest petition is valid, which has been validated, it requires a 3/4 vote for you to approve the item. Because you are 3 members and not 4, that means you would need a unanimous vote to approve tonight. So that is the impact of that item. And I'd be happy to clarify anything. If you have detailed questions, we can get into those as well.
I'll probably have questions,
Okay.
but I'll start with other commissioners. Are there anything that you want to start with? Okay, go ahead.
I do have one question. So far, I think it's the only question. Thanks for laying out all the information again for us. So today, we are just talking about rezoning. That's the only decision before us. But obviously, the packet and the applicant's responses and the concerns we've heard from neighbors reference the potential idea of development on that second parcel in the future. Can you just walk out step by step, like rezoning has to happen first? If rezoning passes, what then would be sort of the next permitting step, and what is administrative and what is not?
So if the rezoning is successful, that would make the property eligible for one division, because basically the 10-acre is the minimum for AG2. So they would have to go through a certificate of survey, which is basically redefining the lots so that they would have the 2 10-acre parcels. That is an administrative process. They would also need a building permit for any future structure or structures that would go onto the parcel. So those are the 2 processes, both administrative.
Thank you.
And I know in the Planning Commission meeting, some of the public comment was about like the other things that could happen here, and you touched on that a little bit. Can you just clarify again, by right, there's no difference in what can be built on AG1 and AG2. The difference comes in what can happen with the conditional use permit. I know there was some, the initial kind of outreach that I heard from neighbors was, fear that it would be mini storage or propane storage, which we have nearby in that area. But that's a different process.
It is a different process, still a public hearing process. So anything that they can't do now, they still would have to go through that public hearing process for a conditional use permit. And during that process, we go through a very similar analysis as we do with a rezoning request. There's a list of criteria. Most of them are very similar to that, and we analyze the context of the property and whether or not it's suitable for those type of uses.
And you had made mention also in the Planning Commission meeting that likely that would not be a recommendation for approval from planning for any of those other kind of more commercial uses.
So because the context of this area is leaning heavy on rural detached dwellings, not only does that lean towards planning supporting the rezoning in this request, but that would likely also lean towards planning not recommending one of those heavier uses in a CUP analysis. We would have to look at the application and run it through the analysis. But because this is such a heavily zoned rural residential area with larger agriculture outside of that area, it would not likely be a good fit at this particular location for some of those uses. But again, I can't say specifically because we'd have to go through the analysis after seeing an application.
I'll ask some kind of background questions, and it's possible we might pull Carl in since he decided to show up here today. In terms of, so when the zoning regulations changed, because that AG1, AG2 kind of concept, we haven't had for very long. I think was it in 2020 when that occurred?
It was 2020, yes.
Since then, how many rezonings have we seen?
Not have that data with me today because I did not really anticipate
Sorry.
the number of rezonings in the county. I don't know if,
Carl, do you know? I mean,
Do we have we approved any, I guess is part of what I'm getting at.
I think we
we
have.
definitely approved some.
Yeah.
There have been some. I don't have a specific, there have been some. I don't have a specific number, though, as to quite how many have been approved, but I do know there have been some.
We've also had some that have been denied, and there was mention at the planning commission meeting, but I think maybe they were talking about the property on East 1100 Road, which never did come to this body, so I don't know a lot about that request, but I believe it came with a recommendation for denial.
I'm not specifically familiar with that one, but I think there's been several that have actually had denial recommendations. We've also had other zoning requests, not AG, going from AG to non-AG, that have also been approved. So we've had a variety of different types of rezonings in the county. And again, all based on context of that specific property. So.
Commissioner, you moved your mic. Did you have something you want to say?
Well, I've been here for all of them since 2020, and I would say it's not a lot. I would say maybe under a dozen. We've had some that have been technical changes that were initiated by the planning department, is my recollection. And I see Carl, for those of you listening online, nodding his head, that seems about right. I think it might also be helpful to explain what was the process prior to 2020 if you wanted to subdivide agricultural land. Go ahead, Catherine.
So the processes are the same, basically. You could still do a certificate of survey, and you can still do that now. You could also do what's called an agricultural division of the land. Yes?
I would say the process is different.
Different.
Yeah, but go ahead, maybe then it's not all done administratively.
No, that's
Like,
correct.
so that's what's different. It used to be able to be split administratively. Now it requires active vote of the county commission. So to me, that's a different governance conversation. So just to clarify.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And there is also the agricultural land survey. And that is still an option that is available also, but that does not permit the building of a rural residence, say later. That is, agricultural land survey is basically a division used for ag use only. So like a farmer could lease the land and use it for agricultural purposes, or the owner could use it and have it as a separate parcel to lease later. Or whatever.
Is it also fair to say that prior to those regulations and new zoning districts, that there was at least not the same, but maybe not any table of acreage limits? So somebody might have a 20-acre piece of land, for example, that they might be interested in doing a certificate of survey to divide into quarters and 5-acre lots, because we didn't have regulations yet that limited the 10 acres to Ag 2 and 20 acres plus for Ag 1.
Yeah, and I think Sarah might speak to this too. I think the goal of you adopting that revision in 2020 was to sort of bring the parcels in line with the uses and what is happening on the parcel, and matching it to a zoning district that actually kind of fits what is happening on that parcel.
I think some of this conversation coming from the commissioners is getting at like, so I know this area well, and we've seen a lot of houses come in there over the last 20 years, and actually some of them are probably 30 years or so. And there was no public process for any of that. So that's the main difference between prior to 2020, this just happened and nobody had a say, and no public process, and no acknowledgement to the neighbors or from the neighbors or anything. And that's what's different here, is that each of these to divide below 20 comes to the county commission, right?
Yeah, and when we went from an unzoned county to a zoned county, we had specific requirements for each one of those zoned districts. which wasn't the way before. Some of the, and I'll talk about this in comments, I'm sort of hesitating here, we're just talking questions right now, but some of the comments are specifically relating to things that I think have been practices prior to 2020, so I can understand that reaction, but in my thinking are not issues as much now. So I'll talk more about that here in a little bit, but I think that the very specific amount of land that can be divided was a key point, and a key point in following the practices of Horizon 2040. Somebody said Horizon 2040 is Plan 2040, very specifically about preserving agricultural land, not letting these become neighborhoods, but having a minimum of 10 acres.
So hardship is one of the golden factors there. What constitutes a hardship? It was mentioned, like whether or not the land can be marketed as it is that doesn't really rise to the level, does it?
Well, staff doesn't analyze based on financial gain or potential for financial gain or marketability or any of those, appraised values of property. Staff is analyzing just on those 8 criteria. As far as ag, I think I may have mentioned this in my presentation in the Planning Commission meeting. Part of the description of ag land, which ag land could be absolutely anything from tillage to ranching to, market farms, orchards, haying, all of that is ag related. Even the maintaining of native prairie can be considered ag because it facilitates the ag that goes on around it. So the significant removal of, in staff's opinion, significant removal of what would be considered ag is if it is currently being heavily used for ag, like tillage, or if there's an established orchard on the property or something of that nature, and that is all going away. And now we would be developing the property. That would be a significant loss of agricultural land. If it's being divided and it's being, in this instance, hayed, and it could still be hayed, it's already a rural property with a detached dwelling, as are some of the other properties neighboring it, you can hay smaller acreages. So it's not a significant loss. It may be a smaller quantity, but in staff's opinion, wouldn't be significant or a hardship as far as ag. It could still continue to do what they are doing on the property now.
So the analysis of hardship, I don't think that's usually related to agriculture. I'm thinking, what are the other examples of a hardship that would rise to the level of a denial?
So hardship would be, the gist of that criteria point is there a gain to the area, the neighboring properties, versus the hardship to the property owner, that they wouldn't be able to utilize the property maybe to the same extent that their neighbors can? That potentially could be a hardship because they are in that neighborhood and they have like uses and it's a similar type property. That could be a hardship. So that is where staff is kind of weighing what could be a hardship to the property owner. It's not necessarily a financial loss or, as I mentioned, a marketability loss or potential for financial gain. It's more, can they utilize their property as intended, or does the denial of the request limit them, as opposed to, is there a gain? Like, are you mitigating some really negative impact on the properties neighboring? That would be a significant gain to the neighboring property, if that explains it a little better.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding of the golden factors is there's not a clear black or white. It either is a hardship or it's not a hardship. It either aligns with Plan 2040 or it doesn't. It's for us to take into consideration, for staff, for the Planning Commission, to take those factors into consideration and to think about all those things as we deliberate and make our decisions on votes. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Also, one criteria point may not outweigh any other criteria points, so you as commissioners have to decide in totality which criteria points have a heavier weight based on, your discussion or your considerations.
Can I ask about the creek? And you mentioned that it is a sensitive land or has some wetlands or something, and so if there were to be an impact on it, that there would be some other level of permitting or something like that. And so this property, as if the split comes through as proposed, has an area that has some landlocked property on the far side of the creek. So presumably there'd be some kind of interest in crossing the creek in one way or another. What can you talk to us about that?
Well, they do have a field entrance already, and that's on that south portion. So they could access it, if they're going into hay or something, they can access it already from the field entrance. They don't have a curb cut type, county permitted entrance. That would only take place on the north side. So in theory, it may look landlocked because it has the creek running through kind of at an angle, but they could still potentially get in there to utilize for hay or whatever with farm equipment because there's a field entrance. Yeah, absolutely.
And thank you, that was helpful. I had not noticed that.
But to that point, I mean, as part of, we talked about the step-by-step. So if rezoning is approved, the property owner moves forward with requesting a certificate of survey, presumably, as I understand it, so correct me if I'm wrong, that part of that certificate of survey process that is administrative and building permit process is a review of any environmentally sensitive areas within the parcel or within a certain distance of the proposed building or dwelling that is being proposed. So there will be other opportunities to assess that, right, and potentially impose any protections there. And then, so that's my first question, is just to confirm that I'm thinking of that right. And then about the crossing of the creek, is there anything within sort of building permits or site planning that speaks to that type of building or development when we're talking, I mean, because it can take a lot of forms in my experience.
I would have to let Carl weigh in on that because I'm not familiar with the building permit process in the county, but typically for the stream, and I think if the applicant is here, they can talk to you a little bit more about it, but anytime you're impacting either a lake or pond or stream, you do have to go through the state for the water, any changes you're doing to bodies of water, so there would be that. But
With each building permit, there is a zoning review, and part of that zoning review looks at the sensitive lands. If they're planning on building a driveway across a creek, that would trigger that additional review and checking and making sure that the state agency has looked into that. It's my understanding that the applicant intends to build north of the creek, but I would let them confirm that.
Commissioners, this also has an applicant. Is the applicant here, and would you care to add anything to the staff presentation?
yes.
Want to get to it, that slide.
Yeah. Come up to the mic so we can, even if you're talking to Catherine.
Sorry. Dean Grove with Grove Engineering. I was just asking, because I knew she had a great presentation that I didn't want to put up something and just reiterate for 15 minutes. Concept plan was there that showed that, and I may be mistaken.
So that's in the presentation, it might be in the packet.
Well, anyway, again, Dean Grove with Grove Engineering. I just kind of want to back up and give you a little background on the information. The property is owned by GCB Holdings, which is part of the Fritzl family. That property was bought for one of the brothers, lesser known Ben, who never really took part of the business, but that property was bought by them, and Ben lived out his life there until he passed in 2021, and his wife lived there until, I believe, 2023 when she passed. So now the holdings company is going, well, Ben's gone now, we don't really need it. I will add that his three sons are part of the GCB Holdings, so I guess looking out for Dad that they had an interest in that property, but now not so much. So they asked Mike Flory, who's a Douglas County resident, looked at putting it on the market for them, I think it was priced too high to begin with, and when they came back, and one of the issues that you've seen on other places is when you take 20 acres and you have an old house on it, it's kind of hard to get financing because, they want a smaller piece because if something happens, it's not worth that. So Mike came to me and he said, well, Dean, what can we do here? And so I looked at it and I suggested go to the AG2 zoning because when you look around and every residence but the one, Ms. Biles, that's 1225 is zoned AG2 adjacent to it. So, I started that kind of ball rolling when he asked me about it. Again, I looked at the comprehensive plan, it talks about the goals of, having smart growth, but, strong management of where that growth is. So this seemed to, pardon me, I put it on silence and canceled everything. But anyway, so that's what I did. And again, talked about the marketability of it. There'll be some discussions about greed later, and we'll address that. So what I proposed was the rezoning. There was a concept plan in your packet where I looked at how do I divide up the 10 acres, put the whole creek on the east 10 acres. One of the things, there would be a certificate of survey or now boundary survey, and it would include a natural resource protection agreement. So where that wetlands is and that creek will get, the owner will sign that agreement when he splits it that says, hey, I know it's there, there, and it doesn't mean he can't touch it. There's just rules on what he can and can't do. Right now, the only thing that, because it's designated as wetlands, so the federal government would have jurisdiction over that, but until you go through this agreement, it's kind of unchecked. If you look at that, they're at the very east end, there's not as many trees. The wetlands didn't go up to the end, and so if there was a crossing, it would probably happen, at the east end where there isn't the wetlands. It wouldn't be the agreement in place when it's subdivided. So just to kind of fill in what you guys were talking about there. I do want to say that we talked about agriculture and taking property away. For all intents and purposes, doing this, that it's, the plan is for another residence. Looking at it, I said, well, you can't take access off of E1200 road. So he would take access off of N400, and both sides of the creek is hayed. And with keeping a house on the north side, that south pasture would basically be untouched, except that if the person hays it, he's going to have some hay on one property and some on the other. So it doesn't take away that south portion. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, but looking at it, if I was going to do it, I'd say, well, in that corner up there, I could build a house. I'd have close access to E1200. And typical, you'd have 2 to maybe 3 acres that you would take out for house, driveways, lateral field, and that. Doesn't necessarily mean it's automatically coming out because that person may buy it and want to have a produce garden that produces other agricultural things. That does not have any class 1 or class 2 soils. So it's, none of the properties too close is tillable. So, I mean, while they're both agriculture, you kind of look at tillable ground being a little more, I guess, important for lack of a better term than just hay and ground, because you can pasture and hay ground that's not very good. So I think the idea that, this rezoning would not create a reduction of significant agricultural ground. I will touch base that, as Catherine said, there's just 5 uses that are allowed in the AG2 that in the AG1, and each of those would require a conditional use permit. So it's going to go to planning and back to you. And I think even if this body's not here or planning commission may not be there, the neighbors will most likely be there, and they'll be at those meetings saying, look, we talked about this, and you said it was a residential neighborhood, then that means it's not appropriate for those things that came with the AG2 zoning. So with that, I think, looking at it, from all intents and purposes, in my mind, it's suited for AG2. In fact, if you probably just looked at the map, you go, well, why isn't that one AG2? And, as you talk about the hardship, I mean, the one thing is that when the 2020 rules came in, it was pretty much this, and if you were over 20 acres, you got the AG1 without looking at, okay, let's look at the area and say whether it would be more appropriate for AG2 than AG1. So it kind of got that tag put on it that would have, because I think before those, there wouldn't have been nothing that would have kept them from splitting this property based on the acreage they have. So that, there was some discussion about greed. I think, as I mentioned, the property was not marketable in the way it was in Mike's eyes, and that started this. But, any property, anything you do, you want to improve the value of your property. So doing this would probably improve the property. And if you say, well, you can't do it because of money, well, then you probably couldn't pass any site plans or conditional use permits because somebody is bringing this to you to say, okay, if this is appropriate, I want to build it there and ultimately make money from that. So, I don't think money should come into play, and it doesn't matter. I've heard some talk about the owners and, the Fritzels, and they shouldn't be able to do this. Well, I don't think the family name should have any bearing on this request for rezoning. So, I think that's it. I think, we've kind of covered all the bases. I just think it's a good idea. I know there's been talk about, hardship to the neighborhood, if you will. I'm not sure I see that. When I think about, they can't take access off E1200. So as I mentioned, they take access off N400. Well, they're going to most likely go back to E1250 to access and go any direction.
And Dean, you'll also get a chance to respond to any public comment that we hear tonight too, so.
Yeah, so
You don't have to cover it
I'll be
all
happy to
yet.
answer any questions or sit down and let the public comments come in.
All right, commissioners, do you have any questions before we go to public comment? Okay. So this is a public comment item. For that, we'd ask anyone who'd like to come forward to give your name and address and give 3 minutes of public comment. And after that, we'll look to see if there's anyone in the room for that, anyone online for that. And then the commission will still have more probably comments and questions after that. Is there anyone here in the room who would like to give public comment on this item? Okay, come on up. And Sarah is our faithful timekeeper also.
Okay, so my name's James Nicholson. I live at 1230 North 400 Road, and I was told I could insert this thumb drive.
Yeah, ideally you would have done that before I started your time, so.
Sorry.
So go ahead.
Thank you, Carl.
I might need help getting to my next one too, please. There you go. All right, so one thing they keep talking about is the gold that's on this map. So the purple line around there is a half-mile radius of the piece of property. All the property that's close or next to this property was subdivided in 1997 prior to all these rules. And that's why there's so many 5-acre lots and everything else going on. In today's world, this would not happen. So rezoning this from Ag 1 to Ag 2 just because there's Ag 2 around it is setting a bad precedent. 84% of the property within a half-mile radius of rezoning is Ag 1. Currently, there are 6 parcels indicated in the green acreage up there that could be subdivided if it gets, they could come in for rezoning if you guys approve this. And then you could add 7 more homes in this area. If you stretch the boundary to 3/4 of a mile, there are 5 more parcels in green that could be rezoned the same way, allowing another 8 homes to be constructed. I don't believe rezoning this and setting this precedence in this area is what the 2020 Horizon Plan was all about. They keep talking about agricultural ground. There's 18 acres of hay ground in this piece of property. If you subdivide it into two 10-acre lots, those 18 acres are going to go away because people are going to treat it just like my wife does, and they're going to want to mow the whole thing. So there's a couple things in the packet that I don't agree with. This zoning will have an impact on environmentally sensitive lands. Rezoning of this property and allow it to be subdivided will landlock 3 acres on the south side. Can you flip to my next picture, please? Sorry.
Is it in this document?
Yes, no, it's in the, back in the, okay, yeah, go ahead. I'm technically challenged, man. So this is in the packet, and you can see what we've been talking about, the creek they talk about and how they want to subdivide this. The entrance off of 1250 Road is no longer there, so you're going to landlock 3 acres over there. Currently, it's accessed from the west. The field entrance is no longer there and would not be allowed under Douglas County driveway rules. Some type of crossing will need to be put into the creek to be able to get to the landlocked acreage. This will impact county-identified sensitive lands, waters of the U.S., and U.S. Army Corps of Engineers jurisdictional waters. So any type of crossing is going to have an environmental impact, and the disturbance will change the flow characteristics of the existing creek, and it flows right to my property to the north and right into my pond. So another thing is that was in the report, the older farmhouse and 20 acres has not been marketable given the creek divides the property nearly in half. I don't believe the county commission should be in the business of making a piece of property marketable. The owners have had 23 years that they've owned this property since 1997 to subdivide it. They can't sell it, and now they want to rezone it to subdivide it. So I urge the Douglas County Board of County Commissioners to carefully consider the potential negative consequences of this zoning change and to deny the request. Over 90% of the residential property owners have voiced their opposition to both the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Commission
Mr.
and the
Nichols,
Douglas County Board of County Commissioners.
we've got your time.
Can I finish one sentence?
Thank you.
Preserving the Ag 1 designation will protect the property and leave it the way it should be.
Thank you.
You for your time and attention to this important matter.
Do we have others that are here in the room that want to give give public comment on this? Yep, come on up.
I'm Rebecca Kester. I'm at 930 Drum Drive. So I am with the ownership group of the property in question, GCB Holdings. We purchased this land for Ben and Kelly Fritzl, my aunt and uncle, in '97. Ben and Kelly lived there with their 3 children until their death a few years ago. So, and we know how much Ben and Kelly loved the property, and my goal for this property is for it to go to someone who will care for it just as much. Shortly after Ben and Kelly's passing, I hired an appraiser to give us an idea of property value. Next, I hired a local realtor, Mike Flory. It was made clear shortly after putting this property on the market that we had priced it too high. We dropped the price and put this back on the market, and shortly after dropping the price, Mr. Flory encouraged us to look into rezoning the property to Ag 2. Much of the feedback he received indicated that many are looking for smaller 10-acre residential lots. They proved to be more manageable, and this aligns with the surrounding neighborhood. So we took Mr. Flory's advice, hired Mr. Grobe to walk us through the engineering part of this process, and we have followed all of the steps necessary to rezone this property. In closing, I want the commission to know that we have hired all of the professionals to lead us through this process, and they repeatedly recommended and encouraged us to go through the lengthy process of rezoning 1231 North 400 Road to split this into 2 10-acre parcels. I know at the Planning Commission meeting, several neighbors had a lot to say about my personal family and the greed behind this effort to rezone. I can assure you that the ownership and effort to sell this property has nothing to do with greed. The property was purchased out of love for our family, my aunt and uncle. We are unable to manage this property in their absence, and we need to sell it. Finally, I do want to mention, I think it's worth noting, that 10 of the 13 homeowners who are listed on the petition own land currently zoned as Ag 2. I also don't believe this will set a precedence. As mentioned by the planning department, all rezonings are treated on a case-by-case basis according to the neighborhood they're located in. So Thank you for your time. Thank you.
I'm sorry, can you repeat your name? I didn't catch it.
Rebecca Kester, Koester. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd like to give a public comment? Sarah, do we have anyone online?
I don't see any hands raised for public comment online.
If there's anyone online who'd like to speak to this item, if you can do the raise your hand function. So, okay, seeing no one there and no one else in the room. So closing public comment, bring it back to the commission for any further questions.
Commissioners, I would add, Tanya Voigt is available online. If you have questions on the rezoning, I can move her in. From what I understand, we have had 5 requests for rezoning. 4 were approved, 1 was denied. 2 were special cases involving no increase in density. And 1 was a property that was too small for an ag sub boundary survey due to row acquisition in the 1930s. So it made 2 parcels available. And then 1 was approved based on plans for a future niche agricultural use, but it doesn't appear that it's been developed as such. And if I can pull Tanya in if you want to hear from her.
That was 5 rezoning requests of this similar nature, 4 approved.
Well, from
and 1
Ag 1
denied.
to Ag 2. So I
Yes.
won't say of similar nature, but I would say of
Ag
Ag 1 to Ag 2. And 4 were recommended, 1 was denied.
Thank you. I have a question, and this might be a Carl question, if you're willing, and either one of you, about the field entrance. So doesn't qualify as a Douglas County driveway for a variety of reasons, but a field entrance that's existing, is that allowed to be kept and used as a field entrance?
I don't know all the history behind that field entrance, so I can't say whether that can remain or not. That would ultimately be a question for Public Works as to what the future of that field entrance would be.
Okay, I'm gonna hold on that and see if that's something that rises to the need, but I was curious about that. Commissioners, other thoughts or questions?
Well, I don't have any questions. I have some thoughts. Maybe start there. Are we ready for that part? You know, I think in my time on the commission, we've tried to be very thoughtful with the balance between protecting agricultural land and the rights of property owners to have residences out in the unincorporated area. The 10-acre requirement that we put in seemed to strike that balance to me. I can see how some look around, and as I look on the photo that we had of all the properties, you know, there's a number of properties that don't meet that 10-acre expectation, are much smaller. And when I look at that neighborhood, and I use the word neighborhood specifically, it looks like a neighborhood to me. When I drove it this afternoon, it looks like a neighborhood to me. Now, it's a rural neighborhood. I think what we had talked about when we looked at the zoning, adopting zoning regulations, was really not preventing those that are already sort of created neighborhoods from never being able to develop that property in that way, and yet protecting those agricultural areas that were much larger. You know, there certainly is a threat in my mind for many subdivided plots within Douglas County becoming rural neighborhoods relatively quickly. And so by keeping them Ag 1, that sort of prevents that. The argument to keep agricultural land agricultural is certainly important in Plan 2040. It also has a weight on making sure we have enough housing. And while this is one house, it's not a lot. I think that there has been significant discussion about the challenges we have and wanting to have a wide variety of housing options. And so, again, I think that 10-acre rule really reinforces a balance between trying to keep our rural areas looking and feeling rural, and yet also giving people the ability to develop residences on those lands. So that's my first thought sort of about this balance between rural land or agricultural land versus residential land, and how it weighs in with Plan 2040.
I will have some responses to that, but I have neglected to give the applicant the opportunity to respond to public comment. Do you have anything you'd like to briefly say?
There was one thing that I didn't mention, and it wasn't in the report. Through the EPL system was sent out, both to the county, zoning, public works, water district, fire districts, not one comment, of, hey, we don't have the water, or we can't supply fire protection to this property or that. And so, I think that says something that when they looked at it, it wasn't, oh, no, this is borderline or there's some issues, but there was no comments from that. All righty, thank you.
Thank you. So one of the reasons I started asking about how many of these have we had, what's the history of it, because and many of those did not come during the time that I've been here. So kind of wanting that larger picture of what was, I'm understanding what the intent was behind why we made the zoning changes, but what is actually happening with it. So my question comes back to the other parcels kind of near around there that would also be kind of characterized as being surrounded by or nearby a lot of AG2. What is the goal here? So, if one house or two on this lot does not make the largest difference to that area as the one house or two houses on each of those lots, would we apply the same logic kind of within that nearby area? And that's kind of just more philosophical, I suppose, of just, trying to strike that balance that you talked about. And I'm not sure if that's, I don't really think I have that as a question so much as kind of what's the inevitability of that, or is this kind of a standalone thing?
Yeah, I can appreciate that question, and I think it rises to the surface because of the totality of these circumstances, and that it is in reality a rural neighborhood, and that while you can zoom out further and that becomes different, it's also, there are pockets of just like this all throughout southern Douglas County, quite frankly. And so it is to me, a consequence of the lack of zoning regulations and processes that gave a very specific path forward for property owners to change the use of their land in one way or another. And so for me, I don't personally have a worry that approving this request sets a precedent. I think that that's something that for us as commissioners and anybody in governance, that question is sort of always looming, especially in early years of new rules, new regulations, new codes, is this decision that I'm making today about this one very specific thing, specific question, with very specific circumstances, is it precedent setting? So I understand that concern from the public and that worry that it could be, but I don't see a natural correlation to that. I think that given the totality of circumstances specific to this piece of land and how it is currently surrounded, and I will say that it also does stand out to me that the majority of the property owners, as far as I could tell, that have signed the protest petition are on Ag 2 zoned land. And I think that, there's to question another neighbor's desire to do that for whatever their purposes are. It's something that I mean, it's just always interesting to me, and this is an example that stands out of how much tension can really come to the surface between neighbors about what we desire to do with our own land, what we desire the land around our own land to look like, and how it's used, and how we sort of project or try to impose those values and thoughts onto our neighbors. So I guess I'm just saying that to recognize that I understand where some of the tension around this exists and some of the worry about setting a precedent. But I think that our job as commissioners, and this commission over time and its iterations in the future, have to look at each application, whether it's a rezoning, a CUP, that each application has to be looked at on its own merits, and that it's a slippery slope and dangerous territory to get into, and we start thinking and worrying too heavily about setting a precedent, because then I worry that we tip the scales towards not giving enough consideration or valuing the rights of the property owner and the applicant that's coming to us to make a request within our allowable regulations and our allowable processes. And that, when staff makes a recommendation based on all of those factors and filters that we, heard from in the presentation, and that we have to also consider, that recommendation means something to me and holds weight. And I in this particular one, don't believe that there are any significant red flags or concerns raised by others that that make me pause about this particular decision. It's a different conversation, perhaps, if we're talking about a 100-acre plot of land wanting to be subdivided into multiple new plots that then creates a brand new rural neighborhood and removes significant land from agriculture production. None of those factors are present for me in this particular question, so I'm personally supportive of it.
Appreciate the context you're giving, and as I'm looking at kind of these other surrounding parcels that are 20-ish acres, also, so looking at like what makes this one different than those others. So not trying to necessarily like prejudge the whole, like if that property were to come forward, we don't have to decide that at this moment, but really kind of giving me some space for, comfort or discomfort around what makes this property one that could be rezoned if not the others, right? So one of the things I'm looking at is that road access, that many of those parcels don't have the road access that would allow for a second dwelling. So I don't see that those would be, a prime for splits, because I don't know that they could be buildable if they were. That makes this parcel different, that it's so close to a paved road. So, going from one house to two houses in that area, it's an increase in traffic. Every driveway is an increase in traffic, but it's very close to the existing paved road. So in terms of the amount of dust, which is the kind of the biggest thing we look at with traffic in the unincorporated area, is less of an issue there than perhaps surrounding parcels of a similar size that might want to split. If they had the road access, it would be gravel road access only.
I'll just say one or two more things. We did get some public input on increased traffic, noise pollution, light pollution, and it all began with the potential. And I like to look at, and I expect my job is to look at each individual application as it comes forward. We can always catastrophize what could happen, and often in this space, that's something that we hear when people are opposed to a proposal, is what could happen. And we've heard it, whether it's wind regulation or Wakarusa extension. I can only take what we know will be true, and I understand that means we have to live in a space of discomfort and uncertainty, but but I trust that the process that we have, whether that's the, additional properties turning into Ag 1 that makes this all agricultural land go away. I think there's a process that would honor our value around agricultural land. And I think it's a real caution point for commissioners to try to do today to prevent something in the future when we will not be here forever. And I think we just let the process do what the process does.
So, and I see where you're going with that, and I take it in two different ways. So in one, I would say in terms of what we have today is a rezoning, but we have after that, an administrative process with no additional public process that it could be a home. So I think we can kind of reasonably say that we're also looking at, this would probably be a buildable parcel that would have a home. Versus trying to get worried about, I think we've kind of put to bed the worries about it becoming an RV and boat storage or a propane storage, because that would have an additional public process that would likely not be supported. So I would differentiate between things that could, because of our decision, could happen without another chance for neighbors to weigh in, versus things that would have another public process, like another parcel nearby wanting to rezone. So I see where you're coming with it, but that's where I would kind of strike the difference. I do want to say that I think the marketability piece is not a factor. I think in our conversation here, I think the fairness factor is in terms of what neighbors have been able to do with their land and what this parcel can do with their land, within the fact that there is a process available to them. I mean, we can't say, well, everybody went to 5-acre lots and now everyone should get to go to 5-acre lots, because we've changed that rule and made it this process. But because we made the process, we have to be open to it. Some situations that process would get a yes, and not just, that we would always deny that. So I do see this one as having factors working in its favor that other similar size properties would not. So I say that too.
I'm happy to make a motion if we're ready for that. I said I was ready and then I forgot to scroll. Make a motion to approve the rezoning, the request to rezone Z24-1003, approximately 20.12 acres, located at 1231 North 400 Road, from AG1 Agriculture District to AG2 Transitional Agriculture District, based on the finding of facts in the staff report and subject to the conditions listed in the resolution, and adopt resolution 2430.
Second.
And recognizing that there's many people who do not feel that this was the right decision, I am also in favor. So aye. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Motion passes. That brings us to our next agenda item, and it is an executive session, and I have the motion for that. I move that we recess into executive session to discuss an employee contract. The justification is to discuss personnel matters of non-elected personnel and for a consultation with the county counselor, which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship. Attending the executive session will be John Bullock, Douglas County Counselor. No action will be taken during executive session. We return to our open meeting in the room at 7:30. Is that too long? 7:20. Let's say 7:20. All right, thank you. With that, we're recessed until that moment. I do not yet have 7:20 on my clock. Should I wait that out, since that's what we said?
We've got 1 minute.
Okay. All right, now I have 7:20. So we are back from executive session. There, of course, no motion, no action taken. And that concludes our regular agenda and brings us to our appointments would be next. Commissioners, do we have any active appointments to act on tonight?
I know I sent you some on Friday, but I think you guys have still got some work to do on those, from what I understand, on the Barton Ash appointments.
Thank you. With that, we'll turn to Sarah's memo.
Thanks, Commissioners. Just want to remind you that we have the ribbon cutting for the new 6th Street Satellite Office for the Treasurer this upcoming Friday at 3. We've got a drug court graduation coming up. The Planning Commission annual orientation is on there. The canvas is coming up, and I am checking with the Register of Deeds and the Treasurer to see if they can serve. Just want to make commissioners aware, and we're going to do some press release media on this too, that the CJCC is doing a survey, community survey, to help inform their strategic planning efforts. So it's going to launch tomorrow, and it's going to be open for a pretty brief period of time. So we're looking to try to get a lot of information out to try to get folks to participate. So it'll be open through Monday, November 4th. So please be on the lookout for that. There's in the memo, there's some information related to homelessness that Jill wanted to make sure we include, and for some reason it is. So I encourage commissioners to take a look at that and let Jill or I know if they have questions on it. Just want to remind commissioners that we are not meeting next week. And right now, I do not have work sessions for the 6th or 13th of November. I'll keep you posted. I don't anticipate adding anything. I'll let you know if we do. And commissioners, that's all I have.
Commissioners, does anyone have any miscellaneous that they have for the group?
I do have a miscellaneous item. We had a meeting this week of the CEOB board for Kansas Area Workforce. So that would be Heartland Works is the CEOB board. There is a law that has passed the House of Representatives and is up for approval with the U.S. Senate regarding how WIOA funds and workforce funds are distributed from the feds. One of the things in the new legislation is that states that are under 5 million people, we are, and have 5 districts or less, we do. We have 5 districts, and Sarah has a little map to put up here of the districts, can be consolidated by action of the governor. The governor does not have to seek approval from the local elected boards. They can just consolidate. And so due to some staffing changes, there has been a recommendation that our district, which is District 2, merge with Area 1. I said district, I mean area. Area 2 would merge with Area 1. I wanted commissioners to see what that looks like, and Sarah has the map to show you sort of what that looks like. So we're in the green area there, and there's workforce centers in Lawrence. The stars are the full-time workforce centers in Topeka and Lawrence and Junction City and Manhattan, and you can see where Area 1 is. That is the recommendation, and the CEOB board is considering that right now, and we'll probably be voting on this very, very shortly. Yeah.
So when you say, and this is the governor, then can consolidate some of these if that is her desire and the recommendation of the various boards, does that mean consolidate all of them into one, or does it mean they can pick and choose? She could consolidate them all into one. But the recommendation
that came to the CEOB board, right, that came to us was, and it's not from the governor, it is from some people within Heartland Works, is to connect to Area 1. That's one option. The other option is, we as a county could put our vote in with the other 17 counties, right? To just stay where we are. We could say, hey, we'll wait to see how this plays out. The recommendation that came out was sort of maybe we can sort of set the table for the governor on what we'd like to do, make it easier on them. There has been some discussion about, is Area 3 a better connection for us? I think after some talks with Gina Kaufman, who is currently the executive director for Heartland Works, there's concern that we would get swallowed up a little bit by Johnson County, Leavenworth County, and Wyandotte County. They have very large employers. We bring some significant dollars to the table, and that might get eaten up like wood. And I don't want to say this is going to happen, but to think about, why would we have a workforce center in Lawrence and Lenexa? Would it be fine just to have a workforce center in Lenexa alone? And so that was sort of the impetus behind saying, maybe we should work with someone to the west who needs a different type of services than we need, rather than joining a large area in the eastern part of the state. So I just wanted to check in with commissioners, see what questions you had about that, what thoughts, because I'll be voting on behalf of our county here very shortly.
I guess I would kind of look at Area 1 and wonder if they wouldn't feel the same about getting kind of overshadowed by Area 2 in terms of population. It does seem like the Area 2 that we have, that Lawrence to Junction City corridor, makes a lot of sense in terms of workforce. But I don't know enough about the benefits of consolidating these. Is it a staffing issue? Is it capacity? What's the benefit?
Yeah, I think it has to do with, I think, more making funds available where the need is, rather than by carving districts, that we're a smaller state. And so being able to apply it across the state, that's my guess. My understanding to your question about what does Area 1 think of joining with Area 2 is that they're supportive of that recommendation.
I would say, we have been invited to a meeting with the Big Five counties coming up in November. I don't know when this vote is. It could be something that if all 5 big counties had recommended to the governor that we don't think you should change, maybe that would be. So this is also an issue that if we had information, Commissioner, we could try to talk about at that event.
Good. Mm-hmm.
That's a fairly short meeting with a pretty tight agenda, so I'm not sure if there'll be a lot of discussion at that. Otherwise, it would be a pretty great opportunity.
Well, and it also sounds like, sounds like the idea of the recommendation is to try and be suggestive to the governor and make the process simpler for the governor, so the governor isn't trying to discern all these nuances. So, in that way, it does feel, without knowing sort of all the nuances and totality of circumstances about what's challenging with the way the funds are allocated currently, it seems that it being a recommendation from Heartland Works about how to organize themselves and organize their workforce centers seems important to honor, I suppose. I appreciate the explanation about why not join with Area 3, because when I look at that map, that's what I would
That
sort
was
of
my
immediately
first
think.
reaction to it, was
That there's
like,
all these corridors between us.
and what I think Heartland Works staff has talked with both Area 1 and Area 3 about this, and I'm sure this is being talked about with all the area workforce centers. Just the way Leavenworth, Wyandotte, and Lenexa approach it is very different than how, one way I would say it is here, in my experience with workforce development, it's focused on the person, the employee, and finding the right match for them in a community of our size, not Ford Motor Plant that needs a lot of workers, and how do we train up those workers to move them in? It's just a different context, and that was one thing that was shared with me to think about, like, is that more what we're like? Because out maybe in Western Kansas, it's more about what the worker needs and making the right match with the employer. And it may give some of our community members more options than they currently have. I think our connection with Topeka is really good right now, understanding what workforce they need there. So those are just some thoughts, and if you have any others, I'm all ears.
feel like I don't have enough background to give a good recommendation, but I have to say the area 2, as it's already mapped, feels the most intuitive in terms of what our workforce needs are versus other parts of the state. But I don't have enough data behind that to feel strongly. I would really be interested in the recommendation of the Heartland Works Board.
Yeah, I mean, the recommendation holds weight. 'Cause, I mean, their organization is who experiences the impact of whatever that reshuffling means, positive or negative or neutral. So I think taking their recommendation to heart seems important. And I can see that, like, excuse me, while I-70 is an incredibly long road, all of those communities, you know, with workforce centers currently in Area 2, and, you know, a number of them along Area 1 are in cities that are along I-70. And so while that's a very large corridor, I recognize there is some linkage there where, you know, our community is sort of the last stop before, or the first stop to which we are going outside of the metro that does have a very different workforce in general, and it's just a very different community. So I can see that there would, you know, as per usual, that sort of our little nook of the state and our communities look a lot different than the 4 larger cities and counties, and also look a lot different than most of what's represented in Area 1. But again, I think I would, if I were in your position, Commissioner Kelly, I think really listening to the reasoning and purpose behind Heartland, the organization, Heartland Works recommendation, that seems important to mind. And ultimately knowing that the governor has final say, and it could be that we're all one area.
All one area, yeah.
As far as being all one area, that, you know, I recognize, you know, rural state, smaller amount of people, but we're so unevenly distributed. I think that doesn't feel right in terms of having only one area. When I think about, and I've dealt with a fair number of like industrial suppliers in Salina and Great Bend, and that some of their workforce needs are kind of similar to, especially Junction City and maybe even and Lawrence too. So I don't think that's a terrible fit. And I could see, yeah, Great Bend, Salina, Junction City having a lot in common there. So
My contacts tell me the governor is going to consolidate. To what level, we don't know yet.
it would be choosing between the options that may be available.
Okay,
I think we'll
Thank
work
you.
with what's given.
yeah, I appreciate that.
Okay.
That's the guidance I was looking for. Thank you.
Lot. Commissioners, any other miscellaneous items for this meeting? All right, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.